Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning from wherever you're joining us from today. My name's Sarah, and I'm the Program and Event Manager at the Reactor in Sydney, Australia. Welcome to another Microsoft Reactor live stream event. Today, I'm excited to welcome Renee Noble. So, Renee is Sydney's newest regional cloud advocate. She is a self-proclaimed Jane of all trades, and she's worked in government doing ML and Python backend, full stack in the ed tech startup sector, and dabbles with embedded tech. So in her spare time, she also leads the Girls Programming Network for women and girls to realize their potential as techies. She also started a business that helps bring exciting coding opportunities to kids and teachers. So today will be a bit of an introduction and a background from Renee herself as to how she found herself at Microsoft, and she'll take you through a few easy steps she took to dip her toe into Azure before her job interview, and to give you an update on how that panned out for her as the newest member at Microsoft. So you'll see in the comments section, I have added the check-in link with the event code for today, which is 15134. So Renee has kindly provided additional resources as well, which you'll be able to access via that check-in link. We'll be speaking for about 30 to 40 minutes with some time for questions. However, do ask anything throughout, and Renee will try to answer as many as possible. We'll also share with you a link to our feedback survey at the end with the same event code 15134, just popping up onto the screen there, our code of conduct as well, which you can have a quick read through. If there's anything you'd like to reference back from today's session as well, this will be available on YouTube, our YouTube channel, on demand straight after today, which we'll share with you the link as well for. But for now, I'd like to hand the floor over to Renee to begin. So thank you very much, Renee, and over to you.
To be here today, and yeah, I'm going to tell you who I am and how I got here, because it's a bit confusing to me, actually, just looking to back about 3 months ago. I never would have anticipated being here, so it's a bit crazy that I am here today talking to you all. I've got this slide here that says ask your questions in the chat, but I've actually discovered that I can't see your chat right now while I've got my presenter view on. So maybe if there is anything, Sarah could give me a shout out potentially, and so I can get to your questions as soon as possible, which would be great. Yep. I'd love to answer questions throughout. But in this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about a brief history of me. Renee, Microsoft, will they or won't they? It's a bit of a confusing time. And featuring some Azure ML and hosting demos of what I learned along the way during my job interviews that I had not anticipated that I would be doing. And then what's next for me at Microsoft and kind of what the job is like. So, who am I? Well, to sum me up, I'd say I'm a tech educator, a software engineer, and a community cultivator. I love to mix and match those in any way possible and just wear a lot of different hats, and however I can best bring all of those together to give it to the people. And what that looks something a little like this, a lot of things going on. So I'll go through a bit of my journey and how this came to be. But I've got volunteering, I've got consulting, I've got teaching at a school, got all kinds of things going on there. So how did that mess of things actually come to be is where I'm going to start off. So the journey, let's start off when I went to university. I went to uni to started chemical engineering and chemistry. I had no idea what programming was when I got to uni. And it just happened to meet a couple of guys living in college that thought it would be fun to teach me to program. And, I quite took to it. And, obviously here I am today because of it. So I smushed in a computer science degree into my already very long title of a degree name. Along the way, I did a bunch of different things. I was in chemical engineering, so I had to do an internship of that. So I did some paper manufacturing at Amcor, but I actually managed to squeeze in some programming there when I saw what they were doing with Excel and copying data about all over the place. I taught myself VBA so I could secretly code some stuff so the non-techies among them could use some stuff to make themselves some nice graphs, save them a couple hours every day, and hopefully not lose any data because it was concerning. I did some bioinformatics. I did some research, and for my honors in chemical engineering, I actually went, there's a list of things here that they want you to do your honors thesis in, and I don't really want to do any of those. Some of them is literally watching concrete dry, and I'm not really up for that, but I've been doing all of this cool machine learning and algorithm stuff. Maybe I could go and talk to a lecturer who really likes sustainability, something I really liked, and see if I could do something combining those. And that I did. So right from there, I kind of already got into ML. So let's just zoom that down. There's a lot of stuff going on there. Let's just put in a little bubble. That's the uni times. Then I went off into the start of my career. I went to Data 61 at the CSIRO first. I did just some Python backend stuff. Then I worked on a project called Ribbit, which is an internship matching platform to match interns with startups. And I did some machine learning and some natural language processing to work out how we could basically vibe check the companies and the students so they'd have the best time together. So not just the best skills match, but something that they'd enjoy the culture and have a nice time learning what it's like to be part of the industry. So let's bubbleize that as well. Then I went off to work at an ed tech for a few years. Did full stack development there, and it was a learn to code platform. So I also worked on content creation, which is, a lot like the stuff I'm doing now as a cloud advocate. But I, lived the startup life for 3 years, and spread the joy of coding through that. So that's, what I'm going to call my main career path. But as you see, I'm making a little bit more room for some other stuff because, as we saw in the picture, I don't kind of like to just do one thing at a time. So we've got this magical green bubble, but I put it all on the screen, but I simply can't fit it with everything else. So we're going to have to go into the green bubble land. And this is going to talk about the Girls Programming Network. So while I was in university, I joined GPN, as we call it for short, as a volunteer. GPN provides free coding workshops for girls taught by women and also includes gender diverse people as well. And we were just there to make girls realize that they could have, great time doing coding, as well as improve our own confidence and our own skills as volunteers. So that photo back there, that's about a year after I joined. Today, this is what GPN looks like. So shortly after that photo was taken, the person leading GPN at the time said, I can't run this for next term. I need someone to take over. I really hope someone will put their hand up because otherwise I have to cancel the workshop. And I went, okay, I've done a bunch of stuff. Living in college, I'd organized events, so the food fair or being the secretary and all kinds of things. So I know how to bring something together. What's involved in this? And she said, oh, it's easy. All you have to do is send a couple of emails and turn up early with the fruit. I went, that's too easy. I can do that. Put my hand up to run the event for what I thought was just one term. Turns out it wasn't just the one term. It's still going now, of course, as you saw by my pictures. But I also, it wasn't what she said it was. It was a little bit more work than a couple of emails and turning up with the fruit. And I also managed to make it into a lot bigger thing for myself because I'd heard some things that have been saying, we should do this, we should add that. I was like, well, I only have the one term to, contribute to this. I guess I'll just try and do all the stuff that we've been saying we should do for a while. So we chucked that in, and then it also turned out it wasn't just the one term, and I kept on going, and we kept, polishing it up and putting it all together, and we ended up with something that looks like this. We've got kids doing coding, we've got unplugged activities, we've got mentoring sessions, and it's just a fun time where girls get to meet, role models and friends and eat a lot of junk food. Healthy food, and just come together around the shared enjoyment of technology. So I polished up something that was already really cool into something that was super awesome. And we went from having about 40 girls come a term to 180 girls coming a term. We would have had more, except we ran out of space in the building to put them all. So I went, oh goodness, what are we going to do next? And we can't fit any more girls, and surely this isn't an issue that's isolated to Sydney as well. And we were hearing that other people would really like to be part of something like GPN. So I went, okay, why not franchise this? And today, this is just a little snapshot of it. We've got girls coding all around the country, in all kinds of regions. And we've spread, even during the pandemic, we managed to go to a few new locations, Brisbane and Melbourne. And we had over 1,500 girls learning to code a year with us before the pandemic hit. So very excited to have us back up and running sometime, in the post-COVID world where we can have everybody back together. So we add a couple more bubbles to the list. I've started with GPN and I've taken over GPN and I've made it into a massive, endeavor. And I add that to my career pipeline. I'm going to call that my passion career, even though, most of it was volunteer work. So then where next? So that's all going on. I'm teaching kids, I'm doing dev work, I'm being a woman in tech that people can see, I'm inspiring girls. Where am I going to go with this next in my career? Well, of course, I'm going to go to COVID. Whether you like it or not, that's what's happening next. And it was, a time when the things that I enjoyed doing, like GPN, started to fall away. We tried to take GPN online for a while, but it was just a massive endeavor. And I was also doing other things, like I was a swing dance teacher and other kinds of things that, gave me a bunch of cool skills and cool experiences and friends. But they all kind of started to fall away. And as everybody knows, during COVID and working from home, it can kind of just balloon out and take up all of your time. And then, like many other people out there, I just went, I'm not really vibing. This is not fun like it was before, and maybe there's something else for me out there. And I started to think, actually, I'd really like to support people engaging with experiences like GPN. Girls come to the workshop once a term, and they would often come up to me and say, what can we do till the next workshop, Renee? And I would go, oh, geez, I'm not sure. Like, you can go online and do some things, but there wasn't really a community or a long ongoing way to engage between the terms, which kids were really seeking out. And I knew from my work in EdTech that teachers and schools are really struggling to deliver the digital technologies curriculum. So I went to my job and said, dear job, please no job. Thanks in advance. I'm going to go start my own business, Connected Code. So this is kind of what happened next. So GPN was ticking along in the background. I started my business, and my business was designed to, work with schools, community groups to create these kinds of ongoing experiences where kids or teachers or schools as a whole could learn to code and really engage with it in an exciting project-based way. And build technology, build games, build all kinds of things, and get excited about tech and pick up those skills in a meaningful way and actually learn to code, rather than, some of those programs where you play with a drone. You've learned to code today, basically. You've satisfied the digital technologies curriculum, tick it all off. So I went, we can do more. We can give these kids real experiences and give the teachers who were trying to teach them real confidence around it. So I started my business, and I started working on material and engaging with, different organizations. Then this also happened to happen. A job at a school came up. So for the last year, I've been working just teaching one singular class, Year 9 Cambridge Computer Science class, teaching them how to code, how the internet works, all kinds of things, taking apart computers, you can see here in this picture. And it's been a really exciting way to really get back to basics on where people's understanding of technology really starts, because sitting in our tech ivory towers, we can, imagine everyone should understand how to, use technology as a basis, and then coding, you just layer on top of that. But there's so much to learn in this day and age. So it's really got me back to basics of that. I also did a bunch of other things. I did public speaking. I did a bunch of consulting for different organizations, whether I was working with the government to talk about development and product management and Scrum, or working with not-for-profits to help them make educational content. It was all going great. It was it's a good first year for a new business. Until 3 months ago, it kind of changed. I got this message from Shiva. Shiva is a person who works at Microsoft. She used to work in a department allied with the Microsoft Reactor, working with the MVP program. And she sent me some messages saying, "Hey, Renee." Shiva was a former GPN tutor. So she knew I loved working with communities and technology and teaching people. So she said, "Hey, Renee, you should apply for this job." And the job was a regional cloud advocate for the Sydney Reactor. And I went, interesting. So in this job, I'd basically get to teach people how to use technology through workshops and, online events like the one we're doing right now, and just, upskill the community and deliver whatever they need, working with students and startups and professionals and bringing them all together like a community. And she's like, yeah, it's just like running GPN. There's this stuff for kids, etc. It sounded really cool. And so I went, actually, but I just started my own business and I'm working at a school. And she's like, no, don't worry about it. Just like have a chat to Michael in the Sydney Reactor, see what it's like. It's like GPN. It's amazing. It's just built for you. I'm like, well, always excited to know, a few more people, especially. So I kind of went into it and went, actually, the very least, I could get to know some people in the Sydney Reactor. And that would be really helpful for my business. I could deliver stuff there. They would hopefully get something out of it. So I had a little bit of an ulterior motive, I feel, going in. Feels bad that saying that now, given, I took the job and, I wasn't trying to waste people's time, just give them a cool connection. But it's really, that's kind of how I went into it, thinking like, well, maybe it's a cool option. Maybe I could do it part-time. We'll find out. So I went in and I talked to Michael. So Michael works in the Sydney Reactor and across, several of the Asia Pacific reactors, making sure they have cool content. And he kind of gave me the lowdown on what it'd be like. So I asked him, like, oh, it's like running GPN. So I'd be working with kids and delivering content for them. And he's like, not really the kids, more like startups and professionals. I'm like, okay, interesting. That's kind of not what I had thought it was about. But, still kind of interesting way to find an intersection between more technical skills, because, teaching kids, you only get to use so much of your technical knowledge, and to really build a community around that. So I was like, okay, this is an interesting option. And he asked me if I wanted to, talk to the hiring manager, so Justin, the guy who'd be my manager, if I were to get this job in the future. And I went, yeah, I could talk to another person, being like, well, it never hurts to have another friend. I like friends as much as I like having 15 different jobs. That's in fact how I get a lot of the jobs. So I said, okay, yeah, sign me up and I will talk to Justin. But first, he also said you should probably have a look at Microsoft Learn and learn a little bit about what you would be, teaching and working with if you were to get on board with this job. So I went, okay, cool. I'll have a peek at that. And I went on and I, first looked and was like, oh goodness, there's so many things that I could do a tutorial on. Where am I going to start? So I kind of just, had a peek around and okay, what am I going to do? I've kind of got a lot on with the business and school at the moment. And we were obviously learning online due to COVID at that time. So I'd already had to throw out my whole curriculum. So it was a busy time. So I was like, what can I do just to get a taste of it without having to commit to a whole new knowledge base? And then I found this exciting tutorial on machine learning, clustering algorithms for penguins. And if you know me, and if you can see my outfit, I love small, adorable animals. So I was like, well, obviously, I'm going to do this. Firstly, got a background in machine learning, so I can pick that up quickly. And then I can also, do stuff with penguins, and that's good. So I went, okay, I'm gonna power through this before I talk to Justin and burn the candle at both ends a bit to squeeze that in. So yeah, I'm actually going to do a little bit of a demo for what I did to kind of upskill in my first taste of Azure, and machine learning on Azure. It was super interesting coming from a machine learning background, actually, to use a low-code, no-code tool to do that. So going into that, not everyone on the stream might, is necessarily a machine learning enthusiast yet. So I'm going to a little bit about what clustering is. So clustering is a unsupervised machine learning algorithm. And basically we can take data. In our case, we're going to look at penguin data. And we can basically lay it out in an n-dimensional space. So in this case, it's unsupervised. So the thing is, we're not going to actually use the species. You might want to use that later to check if these got clustered into species. Like, does, species 0 actually, typically, all have the same body mass and flipper length and kind of sit in the same area. But we're not actually going to look at that today. We're actually going to look at these other features, which is what we call them in machine learning. So I've got 4 features here. I obviously can't draw in 4-dimensional space. I'm not that talented. But just imagine more dimensions, and we can plot out all the points that we have. So in this case, we've got 6 lines of data, but I'll get to the data in a minute. So for how many lines of data, you put out all your points, and then you can work out where the centroid of each thing is. So you have to say how many clusters you anticipate there's going to be. And for this one, we know we say there's going to be 3. We know there's 3 species, and we are anticipating that those penguins are going to fall into their species clusters. And then once you have those, you can strip away all that training data, and then you can test it out on new data. So we can say, hey, here's a new item, and then we can work out maybe it sits here and it's closest to our blue dot, and that's our cluster for, say, species 1 of our penguins, or this kind of feature kind of penguin that looks like this. And we can use this kind of clustering for a whole bunch of different things, and you don't have to know what the answers are. You don't have to have a categorization for, like in this case, we have the species and we anticipate that they'd fall into species, but maybe you have just some other kinds of data that you've observed from the environment or from behavior, and then you just kind of want to see how those group together and if there are clusters around them, and maybe you can predict the outcomes for different situations, new situations based on that. So first up, I jumped onto Azure, and this is kind of the scariest part going into it when you haven't used Azure before, and maybe if you haven't done cloud hosting things before. So you kind of need to start by setting up your resources. So we start off here, we're going to make a new project, and we're going to start off by making a machine learning project. And then we are going to create our project and put in a bunch of data. So I'm going to give it a resource group name. It's a new group. It's about penguins. And we don't actually need the rest of this stuff, so we're just going to create it. This is all advanced stuff. And then we are going to open our machine learning environment in a new window. And we're going to start by, we want to get our data first. So we're going to start by making we want to start by making a compute resource. So this is what we're going to actually use. It's our brain power on the cloud. We're reserving it so we can, do that clustering. It's a bunch of work. So we want to be like, hey, this is the resource we're going to use for that. So just giving it a name and setting it all up, ready to utilize it when we want to do our clustering. So, you wait a little bit of time. I've obviously cut out all the deployment times and sped it up in our recording. And now we're going to add our data set. So the lovely tutorial, which I've linked you all to, will give you some free penguin data, which, I can highly recommend. And you can go using the URL to pull it into your project. So now we can click on the thing and we know that we have all of this data that we can look through. So that's step 1 of our getting ready to cluster some penguins. So we've got our data, but as I said before, we're going to talk a little bit more about data. So when we're working with data and machine learning, there's a few things we want to do. So what are the things that we want to do? Maybe, if you're watching it, you want to chuck it in the chat, see if you can beat other people to the things that we might want to do with this data to make it a bit cleaner. So yes, whenever you're doing machine learning, the first thing you're going to do is clean up that data, because data in real life, it's messy, and computers don't deal well with mess. So we want to start off by removing the species. As we said, this is a unsupervised machine learning algorithm. So we don't need this. If we were to use that, it would just kind of put the things into buckets based on 0, 1, 2. And that's not really what we want. We kind of want to see these other features really driving the clustering and the spatial arrangement. So we remove them. Next, we want to remove these incomplete lines. This one, we don't know anything about this penguin. This one, we only know a little bit about it, so not really super useful there. So we're going to get rid of that because it would mess up our algorithm. And then we're going to do something called normalizing the data, because we can see here that we've actually got the body mass in grams. So we've got big numbers and then we've got smaller numbers. It's not really on the same scale. And at the end of the day, with these algorithms, they don't care about whether it's in centimeters or grams or kilometers or pounds or anything. All they care about is how it's distributed, how things relate to each other on each axis, and then using those axes to create the distance between different items and find those cluster centroids, the middle of those clusters mathematically. So we're going to do something called normalizing the data. And there's a bunch of different algorithms depending on the distribution of your data to normalize it. But we're just going to make it so that it's no longer, on a range of 1,000 and 200, which are not the same scale. We're going to pull it all in, and we're going to have it all between -1 and 1 in both axes over one of those bell curve distributions. Now we've got rid of those units, so it's just going to make our maths a lot easier. By our maths, I mean the computer's maths, so it can just do its thing. So to do this, it's super easy in Azure. It's really nice because, having done a bunch of machine learning in the past, you have to do this all yourself with code and making sure you don't have an off by 1 error and things. So we've pulled in our data here just with a little block, and we can look at our data, and then we can pull in a select columns. So that's going to we want to get rid of our species columns. So we're going to go and edit our columns and pull across just the columns that we want to keep. So we're going to look at it by name. What name columns do we want? Here we go. We're going to keep them. We're not going to add species. And then we are going to clean up our data. So we want to get rid of those missing lines. We're going to do this for any line that has missing data. We want to just delete that line. So we're looking at all the columns. Anything that isn't within the range 0 to 1 is out of there, in fact. And finally, we're going to normalize our data. Just plug it in. We're going to use a Z-score. And then we're just going to run it. And we're soon going to see our clean, normalized data, cut out, sometime later. We can go and we can look at our data. So we can see here that everything is a nice number between -1 and 1. And it's ready to go. So we're ready to do our next step, which is our training and testing. So we've got our data all cleaned up. And when we do training and testing, we want to take the data that we have and we're going to cut it up into 2 parts. In our case, we're going to use 70% of the data for training. So we're going to lay out this space. And then later on, we're going to come and test it out to see if it kind of does what we expect in our testing phase with the other 30% of the data. So we've laid out our space with all our points. We add our little centroids at the mathematical center of those positions. And then we are going to take away the data. And now if we add a new item for our testing set, we can work out which spot it's closest to. In this case, it's our little red spot there. So now we can grab some more blocks and it will just do it all for us, which is amazing. So we're setting it to 70%, setting a random seed just so it's going to be replicable. So we're setting it to 1, 2, 3, just following the instructions exactly from the tutorial. It all works, which is super great. The UI sometimes changes, so it's nice to have a new video as well if you ever want to do this later. And then we're going to split the data. We're going to pop it into our train clustering model, but we need to give that an algorithm to use. So we're going to grab the k-means algorithm. K-means is based on, we say how many centroids we're expecting it to have. And then we tell it we're going to have 3 in our case. And then we plug it all in. And then we're going to assign it we want to assign the testing data to our trained model that we've done. So here we go. We've said, hey, we've made some clusters. Now we've got numbers 0, 1, 2 for all of our things. So we can see we've made 3 clusters there. Of course, we kind of don't know if it's any good now because we've just said, hey, make 3 clusters. That's cool. It'll be great. And then test it with some things. You might actually want, if you were expecting it to go into being species or not, you might want to see, oh, it's put these into 0, 1, 2. Is that what we expected? Are these all the same kinds of penguins? But if you're doing a clustering algorithm and you don't know how many items they're going to be, you want to break it. You might want to have a look and see, actually, is this good? Because what if we had this arrangement? We've got these 2 clusters, and there aren't really 2 different clusters. They're kind of blobbed together, and it's kind of like we just told it that it had to have 3 clusters. It's like, I guess I'm just going to put the 3 dots here. So there's actually a thing we can use to test in this as well. So we can then add our evaluation here, which is super useful. We can, check out by adding an evaluate model, we can check out how far apart our clusters are and, how far it is to the center of each cluster, and just useful data. If you know what you kind of want your data to look like and what it should look like, then that's really helpful. So now we're happy with our model. We're like, these numbers look good to us. We can then go on about our prediction. So far we've only used it on our testing data. But what if we had a new penguin and we're like, oh, we don't know what kind of penguin this is. Maybe we're sending it out, using our algorithm on a research station, and we can't send our zoologists out there. So we're going to let them input the data measurements for the penguin, and then it can tell them what kind of penguin it's going to be. So to do this, we're going to set up our inference pipeline. So basically we press a button and it turns out what we've just trained into something we can either enter data for manually, or we can hook it up to the web so anybody could actually just make a request to our item and then see what it does. So here we go. We've seen that we're just putting in a CSV file to test it out on first. This is our manual test, and we've got 3 different penguins going in there. And then sometime later, we see that it has inferred that it's assigned 3 different items. Oops, let's jump back a bit. But it assigned each of our penguins to a different category. There we go. So, but now that's just good for us to do it manually, but it's not really useful to do it more broadly. So what we're going to do is set up a web endpoint. So basically we're setting up an API, which is just a way of saying, hey, you want to request to run our code remotely so you can test your own penguins? Well, great. We're going to give you a web address, and and you're going to be able to send something over to here. You'll need the keys. Of course, don't give out your keys online. I have, of course, regenerated these keys so no one else can go and spam my Azure account with penguin requests. So don't give out your keys online. And then we're going to set it up so that we start a new file. And what we're going to do is the tutorial gives you a bunch of code, which might look a bit scary, but in this code, we're basically saying, hey, put in your endpoints, your keys that you've just generated. Here's the data. So you could do this programmatically to put in some data here. And what we're going to do is we're going to form that into a request. So the same kind of thing that your web browser does when you go to a URL, and bundle up that data. And then we can all then see that we've added our keys and our endpoint. And then at the end, we can make a request. So if we do get a successful thing here, we are going to rip out the results, because we know that the response we're going to get is going to have results. And inside of that, there's going to be somewhere what kind of penguin you have been assigned from the clustering algorithm. If it's not, we're going to just show an error. And then so we're going to run that next up and hit run. And then we're going to see that this penguin has been assigned to cluster number 1. So there we go. We've just, made our own web endpoint for the clustering algorithm, which is exciting. So having done that, I was like, this is actually pretty cool, because normally you have to go through and do all of these manually with code, and it's just a lot of code to do something that's very basic. So it was a very exciting thing to see. So I was ready to have that talk with Justin now that I knew a little bit about what Azure was about. So I had the talk, and he kind of gave me an idea of what the role was like, and I get to work across education and with students and with startups, and be a lot of room to learn and bring my own flavor. It's actually quite exciting, an idea. And he asked me if I wanted to start the actual interview process. And I'm like, well, never hurts to meet some more people. In the back of my mind, I told myself, but I still probably don't want this job. I've got all this other stuff going on, but why not do the interviews anyway? It's always good practice to do some interviews, and you never know where you're going to end up. So he said, maybe have a little more look at Azure, just to get prepared. So I was like, cool, I'll have a little look at Azure. And then 2 days later, 4 interviews had been added to my calendar. I was like, oh goodness, when am I going to have a time to look at Azure? I always like to be over prepared for things. So I was like, I'm not going to have time to be over prepared. So what am I going to do to get ready? Because Azure looked a little bit complicated, just getting started in it. And I went, what's the basic thing that I would hope to be able to do if I was going to be able to talk about Azure with a, base level of confidence about what it actually did? And I went, that's going to be deploying a web app. So I was like, okay, maybe I can squeeze in deploying a web app sometime. Like, it looked hard in Azure, but maybe I can do it. So then, I was like, okay, maybe I should push back the interviews actually. But I was like, let's just sit down, see how long this is going to take. And so I grabbed a tutorial, and yeah, I'm going to show you how that went as well. It's super easy to deploy a web app is what I just discovered. It took me a little while to find the buttons the first time around. So I'm going to deploy some code that I already had, because I didn't have time to make a website. I was like, here's a web app I already have. It's a little bingo website that we made for GPN Online, so the kids could get up and do some fun activities during the day rather than sitting on computers all day. So we've set up the instance with, a little name for it, and now we've set it up. It's deployed, and we just need to add the code that it's going to deploy. So we go to the deployment center, we click GitHub, and then I go, I've obviously already added my GitHub connection here, but you need to do that. And then you just go and you say, this is the repo I want to add, and that's it. Then you wait a little while, and then you go to it, and there we go. That's my little bingo website deployed to the cloud. And, as you saw, it only took about 30 seconds, minus, the deployment time and me not knowing where the buttons are the first time around. But once you've got the hang of it, actually super easy. And I'd never done it on something as complicated looking as Azure, but it turns out under the hood, once you know kind of what, the base level functions of Azure is, nothing's too complicated. And there's a lot of stuff that you can keep going with. So I went, okay, I'm ready enough at least to do the rest of the interviews. And then over about 3 days, I did 4 different interviews with 4 different people. So I had to chat to Justin again. I also had to chat to the lovely Amy Boyd, who spent not only the hour on the meeting with me, but 45 minutes extra just answering my questions. Turned out everyone was super, super nice, and they all were asking good questions that made me think this was maybe just a place for me. They're all talking about not reinventing the wheel and how culture and diversity is important, and just talking about the kinds of things that I cared about. And my commitment to not wanting the job were kind of starting to wane. It's a bit of a concern because I've got this business going on. And they were just saying things like, really getting to me. It was it's about sharing and not selling, because I'm not good at selling things. I'm not going to lie. And making Azure the most preferred platform. And that's really you're looping the customer back in to make it a better thing so people want to use it, not just the thing that people use the most. I'd rather people want to use something, even if their hands are tied and they can't use it and they want to use it in their side projects or something. And that ultimately it's the best platform out there. So I'm like, that seems cool, rather than just trying to be the most used, but not necessarily the best and most liked and most useful platform. So I'm like, okay, cool. Well, we'll just see if I get the job. Maybe I won't have to make a hard decision. 1 day later, congratulations. You did it. You got the job. And I went, oh dear, what am I going to do now? Maybe? Thanks, Clippy. It looks like, I'm trying to make a life-changing decision. That's correct. But this help would have been really useful, a while ago. So I talked to a bunch of friends and other people who were in DevRel and other organizations and former Microsofties. And I change my mind back and forth every day, whether I want to take it, whether I don't want to take it. And I just wasn't really ready to give up what I'd started with the business and with the school. But this was a unique opportunity that might not come around very soon. What am I going to do? So I had another chat with the lovely Justin, and I laid it out on the table, and there were the trade-offs. There was this impossible decision I was trying to make. And I got some really useful answers. Like, the job was definitely full-time because we really want to make sure that this position is really serving the community. But it didn't mean I had to give everything else up. The things that had made me who I was, the Jane of all trades that I claimed to be, with an interest in everything and all kinds of experiences, connections, if I were to drop those, then I kind of wouldn't be the same person that they were hiring. And in a global team where people, our team is deliberately distributed all around the globe so we can reach everybody in our region, there's a lot of flexibility around that. And a lot of the work I'm doing, such as the stuff I'm doing right now, I'm doing after 5 p.m. So kind of could all slot in with the things I was doing with schools, etc. So, and Microsoft really supports the kind of volunteer work I do. So I could kind of lump that in with that work. So kind of all started to melt together. So it seemed that the picture could actually look like this rather than giving everything up. They really just wanted me to turn up and just be me and do what I'd been doing, but now with a whole new hat and a whole new bunch of reach. And, obviously the rest is history because I'm here doing this talk that, that is shown right here. And it's gone great. Everyone's super nice, and I'm really excited about being able to develop the Australian community and work with everybody here, being on the ground and knowing the community and what they want and what they need to make them better techies in both the technical and the community sense. I never thought I was going to work in big tech. I never thought of applying for it, really. I'd always thought that you would be like a small cog in a big machine. But if anything, having worked in small projects and startups, you realize that big tech, they have to know how to delegate and give you autonomy and utilize the best of every person that they have, rather than you just being near to the person with the grand vision and then that grand vision just washing over you. You really have to give your input, and it's really exciting to be part of a company that focuses on making the most of everybody and developing good culture and modeling good practices. And it's really nice to be in a role where I'm valued for my diverse range of skills rather than just one silo of my knowledge. And, other places might value one, use all of them. But here you're valued for all of them and paid for all of them as well. So I really feel I get to bring all of myself to the table, which is really exciting. I really also appreciate that even though I wasn't a seasoned Azure pro, I can see that Microsoft cares about more than your tech stack experience. They care about what everything else you bring to the table and what you're capable of learning as well, because I love learning. I just hadn't had a chance to learn Azure yet, but from what I've done so far, it's super fun. And being a newbie to Azure actually kind of gives me an edge in a way that you might not expect, because working with students and people who are new to Azure, it's a bit scary if you don't know how to use it. And I can kind of relate to that shared experience with a newcomer and be like, hey, I was like you just a couple months ago, and now look at me, I can do this, so you can do it too. So what's coming up for me? Well, more events and live streams like this. My plan is to do a lot of things that I'll learn with me. As I said, I haven't got a ton of experience in Azure, but I really like taking something that seems complicated and drilling down to what's the core stuff that you want to know. And I'm hoping to make that, intimidating tech, things that you might have gone, shh, don't tell anybody, I don't know how to do X, Y, Z, making them not scary and showing you how you can do them and do it as a community. And of course, getting everybody involved as well. I want you to tell me what you want to learn and what the community in Australia really needs. So always get in contact with me on Twitter or LinkedIn or literally wherever. My first thing that's coming up, my big series, is going to be taking place in February. If you have been a person who's like, oh, I don't feel confident in web development and deploying something to the cloud, and don't tell anybody, I don't know how to launch a website. We'll be doing that. We're looking at how to best use VS Code, how to write some HTML, CSS, set up a Python Flask server, use GitHub to get your stuff, under version control and on the cloud, and then deploy it from Azure, just like I showed you before, and more things, might chuck in a database or some JavaScript or whatever we want to do. And yeah, I look forward to having you all along on that trip with me. So that's all I've written in terms of slides, but I'd love to hear your questions and maybe actually be able to see them now that I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming to my very first stream. It's been exciting to tell you all about my strange journey of how I accidentally came to work at Microsoft when I wasn't looking and wasn't an Azure expert. And look at me now, here I am, and I'm excited to work with all of you over the next, coming years.
Great. Thank you so much, Renee. We did have quite a couple of questions come through during your presentation. They were probably more directed to what you were talking about at the time. And we had several comments come up as well. So if you wanted to just go and check that out, I popped them up throughout the session.
Amazing.
We did have a question from Evie come through whilst you were speaking, but there wasn't a gap in the conversation at the time. Evie did say, could this be useful as part of the ETL process in creating BI dashboards and visualizations? That was when you were doing your demo.
Oh, okay. So I'm not a BI dashboard expert yet, but that's part of the machine learning demo or the cloud demo, the deployment demo. Any ideas, Sarah?
No, I'm not sure. Evie, do you mind commenting again if you're still here? In the meantime, we did have a question come through from Michael just whilst, Evie, if you want to expand on what part that was about. Michael said, great session. Thank you, Renee. Looking back, is there anything you would have done differently during the process?
I don't think so. I think... I think just asking more questions potentially up front would have, made the deliberation a little less, difficult. But I think just, having not known a lot about working at Microsoft before, it was just a good way to get, having a couple of informal chats was a really good way to get a taste of it. Maybe requesting for my meetings not to be at 7 a.m. because, of course, they were with the States and it was quite early. And I was like, I'm awake. Luckily, everyone was very... forgiving of that, but it's not the best time to be your super best self.
Yeah, exactly. I can definitely relate to that. We also just had a lot of comments come through just in regards to what you were speaking about at the time. Tim said this is a very powerful tool for comparative taxonomy. He said it could be useful for all sorts of analysis, but he said I'm a zoologist, so...
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's kind of used for those kinds of things. I think because, especially in animal classification, we kind of have the things that we've observed, but we have a bunch of weird classifications that don't necessarily relate to their evolution and things. So it could be super interesting to apply it to that, to see how things that might, maybe aren't actually evolutionary related do relate to each other from their features that we see, or maybe, their DNA, you could use that as an input as well.
Great. Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's all we've had come through for the questions. We just had some really nice comments if you want to go back and have a read of those as well, just for yourself. I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you so much, Renee, for taking the time to introduce yourself. This will live on our YouTube channel, so the on-demand version will be available right now. I'll just put that link up on our screen here, and it's in the chat section as well. So anyone that's tuned in, if there's anything you'd like to reference back, you can do so straight after today via that AKA link. And we've also put up a link to our future events as well. So that is our meetup page directly. So we do still have some events on the books already, from January onwards. So please go there and you can sign up for anything. And I'm sure come February, March, Renee will have quite a bit of input into what we've got on that page as well. So do keep an eye on that in the new year. And I just wanted to say thanks again, Renee, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Have a good rest of your afternoon, evening, or morning, and we'll see you next time for another Microsoft Reactor live stream event. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks everyone for coming tonight.
Thanks.